Denis Villeneuve, you directed the film Arrival, which is about an attempt to communicate with an alien race that has visited the Earth from another planet. As far as I know, you haven't really done a science fiction film like this before, although Enemy did have kind of some elements of the otherworldly. What attracted you to this particular story?
Oh, basically, it's just that I deeply felt in love with Ted Chiang's little short story, The Story of Your Life. Basically, just because of what it was saying about the world, was the idea that in order to evolve as a species, we should find a new form of humility, and and that I thought was like a very powerful idea. And when I read the short story, I knew that there was the material there to make a very poetic and powerful movie. If I was doing my homeworks correctly.
Well, more to that point, I think what's so interesting about the movie is that it's about all the things that usually get left out in science fiction films. You know, generally we have films where aliens come to visit Earth and we immediately go to war. But this one is all about the questions of why are they here? What do they want? And more importantly, how do we communicate with them? So was that part of the appeal?
Yeah, definitely. It's just that I was looking, since years, I was looking for strong material, sci-fi material. And the idea that the main tension of a story that will be that communication really appealed me a lot. I felt that that was so relevant with what's happening today. Of course, other filmmakers tried that approach before, tried that subject before, like Close Encounter of the Third Kind. I mean, I was not the first one to, obviously, but I felt that there was the story had something fresh to say about that topic, and I just decided to make a film out of it.
One of the interesting things about this idea of communicating with the aliens in this film is it gets into a lot of the complex details about linguistics and how we form language and how we understand each other's language, which feels like in such a big way thematic of not just how we communicate with aliens, but about how we lowly humans try and often fail to communicate with each other. How much did you learn about linguistics and language and that kind of science of it in the process of making this?
But the thing is that was very important for me was to make sure that the behaviors of my characters would make sense for a linguist. That the way she approached the alien at the beginning of the movie, the way she start her interaction, the steps that she's doing. I wanted to make sure that that was relevant and authentic, and that for me was the main part that I focused on. I should say. Beyond that, for me, the movie is not necessarily about language, but about the limit of language. That the idea that after, when you're beyond words, after that, the only thing that you can rely on is intuition, which means to be in a relationship with your own nature. And I'm feeling that it's something that is lacking in the world today. Very often, if you meet someone that doesn't speak the same language as you do, very often there's a strange communication that you can establish with the other person just by following your intuition. And I feel that is a very strong. I feel it's a strength that we are not. We are. It seems not using enough in today, I would say.
Well, there's also a very strong emotional component to this movie as well in the Amy Adams character. Not to give anything away, but ultimately this is a movie about a mother and her daughter. So can you talk a little bit about that emotional undercurrent to the film?
Yeah, there's there's two stories that are happening in the same time. And one of them is that we are following the story of a mother that is going through a mourning process. Basically, the more this woman will learn that alien language, the more her perspective about the world will change. And one of them will be a relationship with death. And this idea of changing her perspective about death was something that was like at the heart of this project for me. It did inspire, that was the ideas that inspired the way the spaceship will look like, the way the aliens will look like, the way they will express themselves, the quality of their presence. This idea of death was something that really, for me, is one of the key or the background soul, if that doesn't make any sense in English what I'm saying, but it's like yeah, that was like one of the, I think it's the heart of the movie.
And you mentioned the you know, the aliens and their spaceships, and the design of both is such an important part of the atmosphere of the film, creating the tone, the visual tone and style and tension. You know, what kind of went into that creature design and the production design process of creating these alien beings and their world to kind of bring it to life?
I'm dreaming to do sci-fi since I'm 12 years old, you know, and I was very excited to start this process to create a new being, a new life form, a new way of thinking, a new culture, a new language. You know, I was like, and very quickly I realized that the dream became a nightmare, because it's very difficult to do that, to not fall into traps of tropes, you know, or cliches. You know, it was really a big challenge, and in order to do so, I hired an artist. His name is Carlos Fuente. Carlos Fuente is a concept designer that is overly talented, and we spent months together, slowly trying to find the perfect shape for the alien. And again, as I said earlier, it was inspired by this idea of a subconscious idea. How can I say that? It doesn't make sense, a subconscious idea. An idea that will be a nightmarish idea, that's something that will be a representation of a suggestion of death. The spaceship was like a design with my friend Patrice Vermette, a production designer, and again we spent a lot of time trying to figure out the perfect shape, the texture, how the spaceship will how do you say that in English? The components of the spaceship. The idea was to try to create for the audience an object that felt coming out of another dimension. You know, there's something very frustrating with scientists today. They hate the idea that they always have the pretension to explain the universe just with the Earth elements. You know, we have that amount of elements on Earth. We are dealing with that kind of laws of gravity here. We are dealing with those laws of physics, and we apply those laws to the rest of the universe. And it always creates a sense of sadness to me, to think that we know everything, or we can explain everything. I think that we are not humble enough. I think that I love the idea of that there's still mystery. There's still things that we can't explain. There's still laws that we don't know, elements that we don't know. So that the idea of the spaceships was all, the thinking of the spaceship was all based on this idea that of humility.
And to that point, there's a scale and a scope to this film that's very cinematic and also impressive, given that you were working on a budget that is relatively small to these types of films. And a lot of credit has to go to your production designer, your cinematographer, in helping to create that scope. Can you talk about some of the creative ways that you worked around some of the limitations of the budget you had?
That's a very good question. First, we put all the money into the spaceship. Are you sure you want to do that? Because the idea was, I really wanted, it was important for me that the art of the film would be that encounter with other species, you know, to feel the power of that encounter. and I'm a strong believer on the real sets. I hate green screens. I can't stand green screen. For me, it drags all my energy out. It's very difficult for me to work with that technique. So I insisted that we will create the whole interior of the spaceship as a real set, and that inspired us a lot as I was expecting. It really helped us to create that world working on that real set. It was like a huge, gigantic chamber that Patrice constructed with a long tunnel, and at the end of this, there was that gigantic screen that was like inspired by a James Turrell installation. It was really like being in the belly of a beast, and I'm sure that the actors felt the power of that room, and that it helped them to create to evolve as characters in that space instead of shooting that in front of green screens. So that brought a certain scope to the story. I feel emotional scope. After that, my dream was to create real aliens with puppets, but it was not possible. It would have to cost too much, and we are today. It's the opposite. Sometimes it's cheaper to go with CGI. And unfortunately, I had to go digital for the creatures because it was not possible to add puppeteers behind that screen that were acting with the actors to create the proper shadow for them to interact with something. But after that, we went full CG for the creatures, which was a long process. For the scope, I think that. It's a question. It's like it's my job to create that. I don't know how to answer. It's just I'm coming from a world where you are making movies with not a lot of money. I remember, and I know that you can create scope sometimes. Myself, I think that. Landscape is a powerful ally, and you can use landscape in a very emotional way. You can I remember when I was shooting indie movies before, I was using landscape as a language, and I did the same for Arrival. I mean, it's just that I used nature as a strong ally in order to create that scope. Sorry, I gave very long answers that are like going all over the place.
Oh, no worries at all. You know, another element of this movie that's interesting. It's not an overtly political film per se, but it does deal with how governments around the world deal with this certain event, this world-changing event, and it's sort of, I always couldn't help but wonder do you have a feeling about, are you optimistic or pessimistic? Like if these aliens came to our planet in the real world as it exists now, are you optimistic about how we as a human race are connected enough to each other to be able to deal with it, or would it would we annihilate ourselves in about a minute?
I think that the answer we have basically the aliens are just a mirror of ourselves. Huh? We just have to see how we interact right now with ourselves. We just have to see in the world who are the people we put in power, and I think we won't be remembered as it's not a moment in history where at that precise moment where we will see, oh my God, they put the most intelligent people on power. it's a pretty frightening era right now. Where there's not a lot of wisdom in the world. So if the aliens were landing right now, I don't think it's like it will. We will miss Obama, I think.
For sure. I wanted to ask you, just in the last few years, you've done a wide variety of films. You've done like 4 films in the last 3 years, Prisoners, Enemy, Sicario. Before that, you did your Oscar-nominated Unseen Deeds. What draws you to the material that you choose to direct?
Uh, it's very tough to comment about inspiration. One thing for sure I will say is that it was not a plan. It's just that I felt in love with specific stories, and I stopped making movies for several years. It's a thing that people don't know, but before Incendie, I had to stop for a lot of years, like 7 years, without making movies for very specific reasons. And when I came back very hungry and with a lot of energy and a lot of ideas. And it's just that happened that the project I worked on went greenlit very quickly. So I found myself in a roller coaster of filmmaking where I had to one project after the other. And I feel that I will slow down in the next years because it's like it's a too high of a rhythm. I think that I will need the echo chamber, you know, the my brain to be able to process, to think about what I've just done, and just to think a bit about the future as well. If I do other movies, if I go on with cinema, if what kind of where I want to go now, because in the past years I went in a very empiric way, meaning that I'm working, and now I need to think about what I've just done, and see where I want to go.
Speaking of where you're going, before we let you go today, I kind of wanted to ask you, your next film is another science fiction film. It's Blade Runner 2049, which is expected to be released next year. It's a sequel to the famous Ridley Scott film from 1982. What made you want to take that on?
It's a very good question. The thing is that, first, Blade Runner, the original movie, is one of my favorite ones, if not my favorite movie. And I was quite impressed by the screenplay that Hampton Fancher and Michael Green wrote. And I felt that there was a real movie there, the potential for a strong movie, and at the same time, the potential for it's a very dangerous task, very risky artistically. I mean, very dangerous project. And what can I say? I'm attracted to a risk. I mean, for me, the challenge is huge, but in the same time, very exciting. And I was looking for something. Every movie for me is a way to explore a new space in creativity and to revisit the universe that someone else created was something I'd never done before. And with the permission of Ridley Scott, I decided to do it. And honestly, it has been so far the most difficult and rewarding cinematic experience of my life.
Thank you very much for joining us today and for talking about Arrival, and best of luck in this coming season as more and more people get to see it.
Thank you very much. It was nice to talk to you.
Yes, thank you very much, and we hope you continue making movies.
Thank you. Take care.